Hello, that's working. Yes, so it's only me between you and a cocktail, so you'll just have to bear with me, okay. So as Stefan introduced me, I am Cheryl French. I work at Cambridgeshire County Council, and I work in a partnership, which is a partnership of local authorities. Cambridgeshire is something called a two-tier authority. So we have local authorities, which are the planning authorities, and then you have the county authority, which works on transport or waste or education. And so there's a collaboration required between those two levels of government. So what I wanted to go through was to just give you a quick introduction to Cambridgeshire, then to say, actually, the Millie project, the L-CIF project, is the middle piece of our jigsaw. There was work before, then we have to do the Millie project, and I'm hoping there's going to be an end as well, which is the sustainability bit, is how we're going to move forward. So I'm also going to give you a summary of our project, and then I'm going to go through our low carbon investment fund, how we've worked that, what we're doing, some of the ups and downs, the low carbon development unit, the delivery vehicle, the projects, which we are currently in a very big delivery program at this moment to reach our deadline of August, and then some of the barriers and lessons learned. Okay, so for some of you who are non-native English, this is Cambridgeshire. We're north of London, only an hour away, and so we often have some of the benefits of London on our doorstep, but we are a very large rural authority. Our biggest centre is Cambridge, which is only 150,000 people. So when you talk about developing projects, developing a project which is largely rural with just small market towns and one urban centre, it means you do develop something slightly different to having a large urban metropolitan authority or a large urban metropolitan space. But Cambridgeshire has got a large growth agenda. We've got 75,000 homes coming forward into Cambridgeshire and all the associated infrastructure. And it was really that growth agenda which started off the discussions around what is it we're going to do on all of our existing stock if we're trying to bring in really high quality new stock. So there was a piece of work which was done back in 2010, 2011, which was saying, well, we've got two areas we need to look at. What is our renewable energy technical potential? So how can we become more self-reliant? And the other one was, what is our energy efficiency market potential? So I'm just going to first of all give you some of the work we did on the renewable energy side. We looked at 4 different scenarios, and the first scenario was saying, okay, what happens if cost of money is high, the policy position is pretty low, and there are marginal financial incentives? How easy is it going to be able to bring forward renewables in that market context by 2030, and how much? The second scenario was saying, okay, it's a medium scenario. Money is slightly cheaper, the policy position is okay, like it is probably now, the finance incentives were as they were in 2012, which was a much higher position than we are today. Scenario 3 was our high scenario, which was saying, okay, cost of money is low, policy positions growing from strength to strength, and I suppose this was really where we all were hoping we were going, and that finance incentives were still there at the level that we were anticipating. And then the fourth scenario was basically saying, okay, politically, anything on renewables which had anything to do with wind just was not going to go forward. So we had to take wind out of all of our calculations around renewable energy technical potential. So I wanted to explain those scenarios because I think those also apply very much into the energy efficiency agenda. And what we came out with at that time was that we think that this scenario between medium and high, that we could potentially deliver 28% of our energy needs locally in Cambridgeshire by 2030. And that was our ambition set. And we looked at getting that into the local plan policies as an evidence base. That was semi-successful. By that, it means some adopted it and some were a little bit more reticent about changing it into policy. And we also looked at the energy efficiency potential. And so the market potential across non-domestic and domestic was £880 million, whatever that converts into euros. But the non-domestic sector was about 195 million. And of that, there was quite a big substantial opportunity in amongst the public sector and also the community sector. So we knew that there was a market potential. We also knew roughly now how much the cost was going to be. So to get somewhere around 28% of our renewables locally and to penetrate, we were looking at an ambition of 20%, which possibly isn't what we're going to achieve, that it was going to be somewhere between £2 and £6 billion by 2030 is what the investment was required. So we then needed to say, well, how are we going to do this and how are we going to lever in that money? And what are the organisational structures that you need to put in place to make that happen? So we then came along to Intelligent Energy Europe and we were saying, right, this is our vision. It's a step change in delivery. We want to get the right finance and delivery mechanisms in place, and we're going to set up a low carbon investment fund. We're going to see what mechanisms we need to set up, and then we're going to get a number of programs and we're going to test those to fund and the mechanisms that we've just put forward. Our project finishes in 3.5 months' time, and so there is still a little way to go in terms of delivery, but I think we're going to deliver in time, and I think we're going to deliver the leverage. Okay, so the first piece of work that we undertook was to say, well, if you want to get that sort of £2 to £6 billion into Cambridgeshire, why would they invest in Cambridgeshire, not London or Bristol or Frankfurt or anywhere else? And so one of the challenges for us was to say, well, what have we got and what can we offer? So what we had was a lot of very small projects which actually aren't that interesting to investors. So one of the challenges for us was to say, well, how do we aggregate? Then how do we set up systems so that it makes it easy to invest? And how do we start building investor confidence? So the first thing we were looking at was saying, well, has Cambridgeshire structured itself so that it knows what it's doing in amongst its public sector partners, and so that it can also articulate to the investor community, this is the type of infrastructure in terms of organising structure we want to set up and aspire to. If we've got this in place, will you have greater confidence that we will then deliver against your criteria, your investment criteria? Now, when I started putting this diagram forward to public sector, they weren't that interested. So I have to say that the chief executive wasn't necessarily inspired by this, which took me aback because I was totally inspired by this drawing, and I'll explain it in a minute. But the reason it wasn't inspiring was it was almost too big to understand and too complicated for people to understand. And so what I had to do was then change the way I worked to go back to the first steps, which was saying, okay, let me have that vision in my head, and then let me take everybody else on a different journey, which was one step at a time. And to be able to just demonstrate success as we went. And then demonstrating success was buying in greater credibility and greater support. So how I pictured this diagram was that all of us in the local authorities would cooperate very well. We'd all put some money into a local authority pot to invest into projects, and we would collectively bring forward projects, and we'd work out what, who got the benefit and how that would work through the investment fund. And this unit here was going to aggregate, do procurement, identify where feasibility studies were coming forward, talk to different projects and try and attract them into the programme. And actually the reality that came out of that was that not all the local authorities had the spare cash or the will to put into the local authority pot. That because we were going through a stage of fighting for resources, I suppose, there was uncertainty on how each of us was going to put money in and then get our benefit share out. And we certainly didn't want anybody else to get a bit of that benefit. And that was a big problem. So what we ended up doing in Cambridgeshire is accepting in our partnership that Cambridgeshire County Council had the most assets. And so we also had the most capacity to do work on our assets. So we were going to take the risk. So we put together a fund, which was a £15 million fund, which we were borrowing from Public Works Loan Board, which is prudential borrowing. That money was then identified for project development, and we're bringing forward 2 projects. The role that the L-CIF money, the Millie money, has been playing is to support effectively this role, is to say, you go and find the projects within the local authorities, identify whether they're feasible, go and procure a supplier, and a supplier for us was Bouygues Energies and Services from the REFIT framework. They will do some technical feasibility work and identify which projects we can bring forward and take to investment grade proposal. So that's how the money's been working. At the moment, we're focusing our attentions on here, on energy performance contracting on public sector buildings. We're focusing our attention here on large-scale PV, and that's to really bring in the money and the returns so that we can start the rolling fund and start reinvesting in projects as they come forward. Oh, okay, I've got this. So the fund strategy, I suppose this was the first step of challenge. The original intention was to set up a fund which was a public-private fund. And the first thing that happened when we were starting to talk to private sector investments was, well, what is your pipeline? And we were saying, well, we're just developing our pipeline. And they were saying, well, we just want to know how big it is, and is it 100 million yet? And we weren't anywhere near that. So we'd already wiped out a whole number of investors because that just wasn't of interest. And so we were given good advice, which was just go and start building your pipeline in amongst your stock. And when you've got to a certain scale, you might want to come back to see us. So our fund strategy had to then focus on, well, okay, if we're just using our buildings with our own money, well, then we've actually only got a local authority fund, and we can take all the returns. We don't have to share that with anybody else. That's our returns to then reinvest however we want to. So we went to politicians to say, okay, we may start with a local authority fund, but we've got to have some ambition. We've got to have some ambition to grow this beyond what is just a £15 million fund. Otherwise, you're not going anywhere. And so they agreed this 3-step strategy was, okay, do proof of concept. Show us that the energy performance contracting projects that you're going to bring forward do make a return. And the PV project you can land and give some return into the process. Then when you've shown proof of concept, we will take the next step. And so we're now at the point where they're taking the next step, which is they've agreed to go forward and set up a Cambridgeshire energy company. Now, that Cambridgeshire energy company isn't an ESCO. It's going to start as a public sector company, which is a wholly funded or supported from Cambridgeshire County Council, and the role it's going to play is initially very much around this. And we're going to set up special purpose vehicles underneath a company structure which will deliver large-scale renewables, possibly waste to energy when we can bring that forward. So it's going to start off on a very simple footing. And the idea is that by setting it off and setting it up simply under our control, we understand what investments and returns are coming forward, and when we're ready, we'll go out and partner. And the most likely scenario of partnering is going to be when we bring forward our waste to energy projects, because we have got a large-scale project. And that's going to be because we'll want to share the risk. Okay, so we haven't got to step 3, which was one of the things that we were meant to have achieved at the end of this project. But in discussions with Europe and Brussels, we've been convincing them that just getting to this idea of setting up a Cambridgeshire energy company to coordinate investment is as far as we're going to manage to get in our 36 months. And actually, that's quite good. We think so. So what does this local authority fund do? So at the moment, it's 15 million from PWLB. We've agreed investment criteria by the committee that looks after this. And key points for the energy performance contracting project is that they are happy to accept 15-year paybacks, that they're happy that there's benefit share with school, so that the schools do get a large portion of any savings benefit over time, that the charge that we will apply onto that loan to maintain schools is a small sum, and that small sum helps to reinvest in a team to keep moving forward, so that there are fees charged on this, and that on other projects, not energy performance contracting for schools, we're really looking to try and get somewhere around a 7% return. There was one thing I just wanted to add in here, was when we started looking at projects, so for example, we have 240 schools in Cambridgeshire. It isn't that you can convert 240 schools quickly into a project. And so that has taken probably a year just getting around, talking to schools, trying to describe what energy performance contracting is about, and then talking to the schools to say, if you're an academy school, because in the UK, we've got academy schools and maintained schools. Academy schools are funded directly from central government. What that means is they can't take on a loan. So what we've had to do is look at off-balance sheet solutions. So before I get to the off-balance sheet solution issue, I just wanted to describe what effectively the L-CIF money has been spent on. And it's really the low carbon development unit. So it's been coordinating technical work, it's been coordinating a lot of legal and finance work, and the business development, plus project management. And across Cambridgeshire County Council, just as an example, to pull together energy performance contracting for schools and county council buildings, plus a 12 megawatt solar park, we've had property management and asset management involved. We've had estate management. We've had a lot of legal costs, and we've got an in-house legal team. We've had our energy management units. We've had our schools capital programme. We've had our finance accounting colleagues involved. And one thing that's come out of working with the varieties of colleagues across the authority is that a lot of colleagues have skills, but if they don't have the right attitude, actually you don't go anywhere. And I was explaining to someone earlier, for the first year on this project, I had an accountant who had all the relevant skills, but he wasn't interested in trying to find a solution. And what I found was that I was going to him with financial models, which aren't my skill set, but I've learned a little bit, giving him financial models, and he would just be commenting on them saying, no, that doesn't work. And then I would be going back and doing the financial modelling. Till we came to a point where I was putting too much risk on the authority by doing that work. So I went to talk to our finance director and said, I need someone who does creative project accounting. And then that transformed the whole programme. From that point on, we've had finance models that have been produced easily, scrutiny of our financial deals that we've been putting together, and actually trying to identify just how we can sustain our fees and our finance principles on the local authority fund to continue the work that we're doing. So that's been a huge bonus. Okay, so the investment programme that we've been trying to deliver, schools retrofits, public buildings, so we've been looking at our building here, which is our main Shire Hall, plus a whole variety of buildings, which are sports centres, leisure centres, which have been in Fenland District Council, and also bringing forward a significant sized PV. I just wanted to highlight just how difficult it is in the UK in some areas to bring forward large-scale PV projects for two reasons. In Cambridgeshire, we have a DNO called UK Power Networks, and the whole network is saturated. So to try and get a grid connection is really difficult or incredibly expensive, so that it renders your project unviable. So that's the first thing. So you could get a grid connection, which is 3 years down the line, potentially. So that makes it very difficult to manage a project. That's the first thing. The second thing is that in the UK last May, the government changed for large-scale solar how to get finance incentive. So we now go into something called contracts for difference and an auction. To go into the auction, you need to have a planning permission and you need to have a grid connection. And you need to do some very good financial modelling on what your lowest price is that you can deliver that scheme. And even then, you're in a position of, it's a stop-go decision. So you could be that you've done all this work, you've got a connection, you've got a planning permission, and you don't get your finance incentive. And so that project stops. So it's not easy to do that at the moment. So what have we delivered to date? Okay, very proud of the 12 megawatt solar park, and we're going to be closing the procurement of that in July this year. In terms of energy performance contracting, we've assessed 68 buildings. That includes Cambridgeshire County Council buildings as well as school buildings. So at the moment, we've got 14 schools which are in investment grade proposal, and we've got 8 county council buildings which are investment grade proposal. And by the end of July, we should have £5 million investment into energy performance contracting. Just before I go on to give you the project delivery challenges, I wanted to talk to you about off-balance sheet solutions. I don't know if any of you have brought forward off-balance sheet solutions. I've got 1 minute to go, but this one's really important. The schools which are academy schools in Cambridgeshire, they can't take out loans. And so the only way we can get investment into those schools is if Cambridgeshire County Council takes on an energy performance contract and then provides a managed service arrangement to the schools. So we were trying to get the legal documentation together for a managed service arrangement, and we were going to finance institutions in the city to ask for example clauses that we could use, so financial clauses. We subsequently had discussions with these finance institutions, and they were going to charge us 4% on every contract that we let with our academies. Now, that was going to be a huge cost and would have rendered the energy performance contracting unviable. So we decided that we weren't going to do that, and we were going to take it in-house. And so that has been incredibly exciting. And I think Marika mentioned earlier about how building the skills in-house has been something which has been very valuable to her project. It has been to ours too. Taking that and taking control has made a huge difference to how we can bring forward schools' projects. So in terms of project delivery challenges, we brought forward the solar park. I've mentioned about the problem in Cambridgeshire that it's difficult to get connections, that you have to go through this auction process. And actually, what's come out of the auction process is a 58% reduction on costs. So the margins now coming forward on large-scale solar are pretty slim pickings. And trying to get that finance modelling right is quite challenging. We've used the refit framework to actually deliver our procurement on that. And the exciting part about that is that we've been able to use a procurement which was done, an OG procurement through refit, which meant that we didn't have to go through a year's programme of trying to pull together the procurement on this 12 megawatt farm. This is just a quick description of what I was talking about in terms of the off-balance sheet solution. And it was a quick diagram to show you what we've had to do here. So we've got a supplier, which is an ESCO, so Bouygues in this situation. You've got a school at the other end. And what we've had to do is put ourselves into the middle of these two organisations to say, we're going to take risk so that we can offer the academy school an operating lease, because they're allowed to take on operating leases. And so as part of that process, Cambridgeshire County Council has had to go through quite a lot of dialogue on what risk they're willing to take on projects. So this is just to give you a quick idea about some of the details in terms of energy performance contracting, what we're installing. And the critical issue around the energy performance contracting with schools is that in terms of aggregation, each school is having a contract here because each school wants its benefit share. And so they're not willing to share that benefit necessarily with other schools or have it offset through the fact that one school might perform better than another school. So what are the challenges we've been going through? Strategic understanding of the energy challenges has been quite difficult at times. complexity around energy performance contracting and just around setting up a fund. Ownership of the agenda has been also a challenge, and within that it's saying, well, it's not just ownership, it's whose vision of energy are we all working to? Some of the challenges I've had when I've been to the community and the investors is saying, where does energy fit in the vision around transport, in terms of local plans, in the terms of digital infrastructure, water infrastructure? How are we pulling those visions together? And I think the panel discussion earlier today, where you're trying to bring a number of different issues into one project, is good, but it also makes it very complex to deliver. So I'm on time out now, I'm afraid. So there are a number of lessons that we've learned, and one of the big issues is trust and resilience and sorting out problems. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. The reason why I'm strict on time is that this is a very interesting project, and we want to give you the opportunity to ask questions. So, the questions. I was thinking, when I was listening to you, I was thinking about Dirk, I have to say. He's here from ResCube, and because I thought, why are you not giving citizens the opportunity to pay into the fund? And maybe that's the question what Dirk wants to ask, so we are sort of
yes, indeed.
linked.
No, I'm missing the citizen here. Someone who wants to invest in his environment. When we do an investigation on why people invest in energy cooperatives, they want to invest in their neighborhood, in projects they know, close by, and I'm missing the citizen here in this.
It's a good point, and that was one of the challenges when this diagram was first put together. And I suppose the work that Ox Futures is doing, which is around communities and community involvement in renewables, is probably something which is our next stage of development as well. But where we saw that potentially you could bring in, let's say, investments from communities, is they are another set of money along this top line here. A community bond, crowdfunding, if that's what we'd want to do. And the idea is that we could offer a number of projects which are community projects or public sector projects which they could then look to support. But we're not there yet. We're just trying to do, first of all, proof of concept, understand the challenges, and then when we start bringing forward community projects, that might be of more interest in terms of their funding.
I think here there's a lot to be learned from, also from the ResCube experience, because what they do is they combine the renewables and the revenues from the renewables with energy efficiency projects bring in the citizens.
That's actually one of the things we're doing on the energy efficiency with schools. The energy performance contracting is trying to use the renewables to help us do deeper retrofits, so that the income streams can support that. Yep. But actually we're having a problem with our network, because even a school putting on 30 kilowatts, they're being limited on the export to 11 kilowatts. So the income streams on those are really not actually helpful at the moment. So.
And the regulation, the actual current regulation, makes it even more difficult to develop a renewables project.
Yes.
But we have three questions.
Yes, hello. Can you say something about the size in terms of staffing of those two units, and particularly the development unit, and what are we looking at in terms of operating costs on a yearly basis, for example? Yes.
Okay. So at the moment, the L-CIF money pays for me, and I work part-time. I work 4 days a week. A project manager full-time, and then what I call a business development manager for 4 days a week. And that business development manager has played a very important role over the last year, because they have been the person who's actually been knocking on the doors of schools to engage them into looking at energy performance contracting and explaining that. And I think that role has been invaluable. But basically that's what it pays for, plus part-time finance input and all of our legal costs. Because our legal services are a chargeable unit, so effectively they're their own company within County Council, so we have to pay the full cost of those. We haven't been paying for asset management advice and estate management advice. The current cost of the unit if I'm also including the finance cost, is somewhere around £130,000 a year, so 150,000 euros. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. And also for being so honest and saying, you know, there is problems along the way. And that's what my question is really about. So, you know, I know myself as well from managing a program of this size, really, as well, that problem solving is quite important.
Yes.
So have you got any tips for people, really, in terms of problem solving? Is my first question. And the second one is rather an observation, because I think it often feels when you manage a program like this, you are pretty much on your own, particularly at the beginning, and it's a message back to representatives from the Commission. Of course, we have these presentations and the days today and tomorrow and so on, but there's something about problem solving that is very important to be able, when you're a program manager, to resolve issues and problems that you have on the way. And is there any way of us working a bit more collaboratively, to get some of this resolved? Just thinking back, you know, in terms of my own journey, you know, there is sort of moments when you're absolutely frustrated and you don't know how to resolve it. And I didn't pick up the phone, but I should have probably. And it's just an observation for everyone, really.
I agree the issue that sometimes you should pick up the phone, but there's also the challenge of just getting through and solving a problem and finding the right people locally to do that. I think the biggest thing for me has been, I suppose, at times I've been viewed as the person who has got all the knowledge and can solve all the problems. And clearly I can't and couldn't. And so the key for me was building up the networks internally and externally to help me to try and bottom out some of those problems. And I think I came to the realization that if I hadn't have got that finance person who was good at solving problems and trying to find a way forward, I probably wouldn't be delivering here today. Because he was absolutely key to our delivery. And I wished that I'd identified that earlier in the programme.
I think one of the reasons why, of course, and you know why we're doing this today and also tomorrow, the closed workshop, is that we want to give you the opportunity to talk to each other and to actually share the solutions to the problems. But Barbara, you had a comment, a question. We have first.
I would like to ask how you solve the problem with the Catholic schools not being able to take out the loan. You explained it a bit, but I would be interested in more detail, or also if you could refer, if it's described somewhere on a website or...
It's not described on the website because we're still going through the process. What we've had to do is basically say the supplier, so Bouygues, have put together an investment grade proposal. So this identifies all the varieties of energy measures that in a school to be able to save however much energy and however much carbon, but most importantly, how much that equates to in terms of savings on the energy bill. We've then had dialogue with that school to say, okay, on the basis of this investment grade proposal, we'll go, if you're happy with this and you're happy with the costs in here and happy with the charges that we're going to put forward on the managed service arrangement, we will go into contract with Bouygues and then we will do a back-to-back arrangement with you where we offer you a service, which is effectively what that energy performance contract is, okay? However, if it was only so clean, it would be great. What comes out when you have the dialogue with accountancy is each individual energy measure is treated different in accounting terms. And so when you try to put together a managed service arrangement, it can be quite complex and almost slightly bespoke per school. So what we've had to do is identify broadly the range of measures that we're going to anticipate going in across all the schools, identified what the accounting treatment of all of those are, We've had to dump a couple of measures because they won't work in an operating lease, and we've had to be very clear with our academy schools what it means to be in an operating lease with us. But at the same time, we've had to be very clear with our councillors, so our members, our politicians, that we're taking on risk. And they're accepting of the risk, but obviously if you take on risk, there has to be some reward with it. So the dialogue then that you have with your academy is to say, we have to take on more risk. That means we have to charge you a bit more. So far, in amongst the 5 pilot academy schools that we've worked with, they've been accepting of that because actually their financial position is so challenging that they know they've got to do something. And so having a try of this as a mechanism is something that they've been very open to. I'm happy to go into more detail. I've got a draft version of the managed service arrangement with me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Could you go back to the diagram you
Yep.
had of the overall thing, Cheryl? Thank you. Because I just think it's fascinating how Cambridgeshire and Cambridge is so similar to Oxford and Oxfordshire.
Yeah.
But we've come up with a completely different solution.
Yeah.
And it's sort of interesting to know how many different pathways there are through. And so the low carbon hub for Oxford and Oxfordshire sits where your development unit is.
Yeah.
And we've majored on getting community financing in because we haven't had that kickstart of Public Works Loan Board funding because our councils aren't willing to take even that risk.
Yeah.
So that's a sort of, it's sort of really fascinating to see the different starting points and to be interesting to see how this develops over time. And also looking at it in comparison to Bristol and where Marijke is, where they've sort of started within the local authority and are going to be going out into a company. We started as a separate company and will remain so, but have huge support from. And you've got a unit within a local authority and are now thinking about what the next steps are. So I just think it's fascinating as a comparative study of how you can use citizen financing and corporate structures to work your way through these things in different ways.
Yes.
And just the other thing I was going to say, like Dirk, I was going, oh, where's the community financing in this? With the solar field, with the new shared ownership options and able to be sharing the MPANs, I know this is a bit technical, but you could do a 5+5 on that and still get the fits on the whole lot.
Yeah, we did actually think about that. I have to admit we were slightly selfish on the 12 megawatt farm because we've wanted to get the returns directly so that we can do some into services and some into supporting the next stage of the unit. Just so you know, one of the, well, 2 things. One, Barbara, I think the next step for us is the bolting your lot of work onto this so that we can take the community in and learning from your experience. But the other thing that we've managed to do with our politicians is that they've agreed that the investments into energy performance contracting, the profits can be used to support a team as we move forward, and that they will also support finance to be able to do development work for much larger projects. So that's probably my proudest achievement. Getting investment into projects is one thing and getting those developed is good, but to get something which is moving forward over time and investing in more capacity and skills is probably the biggest achievement to date.